Today I want to talk to you about whether or not you can still make money with Airbnb in 2021. What's up guys, my name is David Pere, active duty Marine, real estate extraordinaire, entrepreneur, even though that's a stupid buzzword these days, and just average guy who does things to make money and has built a lot of net worth over the last few years in doing so. The reason I'm qualified to talk about this right now is that I currently Airbnb a bedroom out of my house, and I have been drastically affected by everything going on in the world, right? And I know a lot of people have been asking, is Airbnb still profitable? Is Airbnb going to be around? And the short answer to is Airbnb going to be around is yes. Is Airbnb going to be profitable? That depends. And there's a few different policies that they're rolling out right now that I am not a fan of. There's a few other things. So I'm going to talk through some pros and cons to Airbnb and my strategy if I continue to use it going forward, so that hopefully this will help you make more money in the future. Now, real quick, a few ground rules before we dig in. The first is, if you get anything valuable out of this, you have to promise to smash that like button to tell YouTube that you did. Secondly, stop real quick, comment down below, have you been an Airbnb host before? Yes or no? That'll let me know kind of what my demographic is so I can make more content about this. And third, you need to either subscribe to the channel so you get notified of more content, or use the link down below if you commented no to start Airbnb hosting, because if you use that link down below, you're going to get $65 off a trip of your choice anywhere and some added bonuses when you begin hosting through my affiliate link. And yes, it's an affiliate link, so I would appreciate that, and I'll smash the like button on your video if you do it. But let's begin. First, I want to talk to you real quickly about how profitable Airbnb can be. And I am by no means the pro at this. I'm just your average guy. I currently live in a 4-bedroom, 3-bath home, and I rent 2 of those bedrooms out as rentals. One to a longtime roommate, good friend, and the other on Airbnb. Now, before the roommate moved in, they were both Airbnb, and I'll tell you, I made more money before he moved in because he sucks. No, just because it's just the reality of Airbnb. So the downstairs bedroom, which is the nicer bedroom down by the kitchen, suite area, you know, a little bit more private, that one I rent for $900 to $1,000 a month when I do long term. The Airbnb, the bedroom upstairs, which is not bad by any means, is a little bit bigger, but it's a little farther from the bathroom. It's, you know, it's just not as close to the kitchen, not as convenient. It's up the stairs. There's a couple reasons why it's less valuable. I made almost $1,500 last month through that one. So $600 difference, $550, something like that. And then on a month when someone rents the whole month and they get the 10 or 20% discount, I still make $1,300, $1,200, right? So this Airbnb is much more profitable as a month-to-month, room-by-room comparison, either way you slice it, over having a roommate. And that's also considering that I'm probably underpriced. I'm sure I could bump it up $10 or $20 more you can kind of play that game to see, is more expensive, less bookings a better return, or is less expensive, more bookings? I haven't found that perfect sweet spot. I just keep kind of incrementally increasing the price, and it keeps renting for the whole month. So I'm probably still not completely maxed out. I bet you I can get it up to like $1,800 a month, which is almost double, if not double, when I'm renting the downstairs. So Airbnb is profitable. Here's the problem, in case you guys didn't know. In 2020, this thing that's kind of like the flu, but worse, kind of decided to just show up. And when it did, a lot of things shut down. One of those was Airbnb. If you were in a tourist town, gone. If you were in like Honolulu, they shut down tourism basically completely. And also the city came in and said you can't do short-term rentals anymore, just long-term rentals. Yet to decide if that's, I don't know yet if that's long-term or short-term. So Airbnbs have been under assault in some markets, like high tourism markets, for a little while by the hotel industry and other things, which makes them, there's still regulations being formed. So as time goes on, as more people will get into Airbnb and more regulations will form, that'll kind of drive the price down and make it a little bit harder to utilize. There'll be some more rules, maybe some more taxes, whatever. But this thing happened in 2020. And when it did, the city that I'm in basically said, hey, if you're not renting to somebody who tested positive or a medical professional, you can't rent your place out. And so luckily I had somebody staying in the place at that time who was kind of wanted to stay in the area, and a lot of the other Airbnbs canceled on them, so they just decided to pay me, not necessarily under the table, but not through Airbnb, to just stay here. And they stayed here for like 5-6 months. It was great, right? But they ended up moving on, went back to, we got allowed to do Airbnb again, and so I started doing Airbnb again. And the difference there in price, again, is a couple $100s a month. Significant when you got one room, especially significant if you got 2 rooms. And so there's an influx. And then recently, most recently, Airbnb has kind of come out of the woodwork and they've just said, you know what? We want to just crap on everyone. So like literally this week, I got an email saying if you do not agree to their kind of over-the-top cleaning procedures and to wear a mask anytime you interact with anybody Airbnb, they're going to shut you down, right? Like November 20th, if you haven't agreed to this, they haven't said they're going to shut you down, but I'm sure they're going to shut you down because that's what Airbnb does. If you don't agree with their policies, you either get shut down or you get downvoted, you're no longer superhost, whatever. And I am a 4-time superhost, so I don't want to lose that. Now, I understand the reasons for this. I think it's a little bit of an overstep for Airbnb to require me to wear a mask in my kitchen if I Airbnb. I think that should be a conversation you can have with your guest, but Airbnb is saying that if you don't do it, you're going to get hammered, right? Like that's their new policy. And the problem with this is they're going to ask, right? So they're going to ask the guest, did he wear his mask this whole time? And even if you guys have a conversation and mutually decide, there's still a good chance that it might end up being said, no, not all the time. We were comfortable with whatever, and they might shut you down. So there are risks going into 2021 with Airbnb where depending on what's going on with this flu, you might get shut down, less tourism, and then there's the more regulations. More cities are regulating against Airbnb to maintain the hotel industry. There's all these extra rules. There's all this extra stuff. So is Airbnb going to be profitable in the future? Well, I think there's a few strategies where Airbnb is exceptionally successful. And I think there's a few things that you need to watch out for if you're going to utilize Airbnb in your investment strategy. Now, the first, we're going to talk about some successful things that you can do to make Airbnb awesome. Now, the first, and I don't do individual stocks, but I think that the moment Airbnb IPOs, meaning their initial public offering and the stock goes public, I plan to invest some money into Airbnb. And the reason for this is that I think because they've had a rough year and they're kind of on a downtrend this year, that when they do go public, hopefully sometime before they come back up, the stock will be undervalued. And so I foresee that because Airbnb is going to stick around and they're going to continue to build and they're eventually going to come out of all this, the stock will go up. So I personally will be investing in Airbnb stock and plan to hold it for a long time. I'm not suggesting day trading. I'm really not much for individual stocks, but I believe that Airbnb is something that will long-term go up in value. And they've proven that over the last few years, even with all these speed bumps. Second, I think Airbnb in tourist destinations that have very loose tenant laws and landlord laws, very landlord-friendly states, I think this makes sense because I don't foresee cities like Corpus Christi or these kind of conservative, and this is not to get political, but the very like landlord-friendly kind of conservative, you know, we're not going to tread on you type states. I don't foresee them regulating Airbnb very strict. So although a city like San Francisco might have insane opportunities, it's illegal. Just like New York, right? They shut Airbnb down, even though there would be great opportunities there. But somewhere in, I don't know, Nashville or the Gulf in Florida or Pensacola, some of these markets where people want to go, that they don't do all these crazy regulations and infringements or overstepping or whatever, or where Airbnb is not being fought, I think it's going to do very well there. And there's some markets like up in the mountains, the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee, where and some of these other cabins where you can buy a fairly affordable home and you can make a ton more money doing Airbnb than you could renting, and it could be very, very, very profitable. You can pay that mortgage down, you can cash flow more to rent another property. I also think there's an avenue for like niches, like the experiences or like the yurts you see on Airbnb or tiny homes. I'm personally planning to own a few tiny homes kind of in the woods, in the country, where you can rent those out for like kind of staycations, or even, not staycations if somebody travels in, but I kind of like the little niche. I personally, just last weekend, I stayed in a 1-bedroom cabin up in the mountains, and it was amazing. There is no way that I would rent that thing long-term from somebody, but I would absolutely go back. In fact, I already booked another trip to go back for 2 or 3 nights in that same 1-room, 100-year-old cabin to just relax. And so I think these niche spots or these tourist spots and these niche properties and whatnot are going to do very well on Airbnb. I also think that if you're doing a house hack where you're not in a duplex per se, where you can rent one side out, or a fourplex where you can rent units out, but maybe you're in a big house like mine, you want to rent bedrooms out, I think that Airbnb is a great model because you can close out the room if you've got someone visiting. So let's say 2 months from now, I know that my mom and dad are coming to visit. I can shut that Airbnb down for 3-4 days whenever they're in town, and they can stay there and then I can open it back up. Now, if I had a roommate in that room, I wouldn't be able to do that. I would have to keep it rented. They would have to get a hotel or sleep on the couch. It's just not as convenient. So I really like the perk. That's why I have one room rented long-term and one room I will always Airbnb or short-term rent, because I can control and shut it down. So if my family comes to visit, I can shut it down. They can have a room, they got a bed, everything's furnished. It's super convenient. It's like a hotel room that they don't have to pay for. That's a huge perk for me. And that's worth the money in its own. Also, you make more money through that than you do through a roommate. And let's face it, roommates get old. Even if you're roommates with a friend, eventually you guys are gonna kind of bicker. One of you does the dishes better than the other. One of you sweeps the floor more than the other. Maybe one of you does the dishwasher and doesn't empty it, or whatever, right? Like, do laundry on the wrong day, and I was gonna do laundry that day. There's always something that roommates may or may not do that over time you might be great tenants or great landlord, great roommate, great whatever, and it just doesn't always work out. So Airbnb is nice because you have the ability to, yes, you can extend and stay longer. No, you can't. I'd rather leave it this way. New guests, new guests, new guests, new guests, whatever. That being said, I've had some very strange experiences as an Airbnb host. If you want to talk to me about some of those, I got some interesting stories. But I've also had much more really good experiences. And a lot of times, Airbnb guests, in my experience, they're either here working, so they're gone during the day, or they're here visiting family, so they're gone during the day, or they're here for tourism, so they're gone during the day, or they just wanted to get away. And in any of those four situations, they don't really bother you, and you don't really bother them. You might not even notice them. I have had Airbnb guests stay for like an entire month, and I saw them like 2 or 3 times. In fact, I had this one guest, she works nights for a hospital as a nurse, and she would literally come home from work like a half hour after I went to work, and then she would go to work as I was coming home from work, and we might have seen each other 2 or 3 times in an entire month. It was awesome. And now she was very quiet. Anyway, so there are some definite perks to Airbnb. Now, some downsides to Airbnb. One, I think the fact that they're kind of infringing on things, right? Like, not to say infringing on rights, but I mean, who is Airbnb to tell me that I have to wear a mask in my own home, even if the other people and I come to terms with the fact that, hey, we're okay not wearing a mask in the common area? Like, that's kind of ridiculous. That seems like an overstep, right? We should be able to have that conversation as adults and say, hey, look, I understand that you understand that we understand we're going to live together for a month. We're both very healthy. I'm comfortable. You're comfortable. We should be able to assume that risk as adults. Now, they should absolutely make it an option where it's like what they have been doing, where you say, yes, I'm wearing my mask in my house. No, I'm not wearing my mask in my house. And then a guest can choose, oh, they're wearing a mask, I want to go there, or oh, they're not wearing a mask, I don't want to stay at that house. That should be up front. I'm all for that. I'm all for being open about it, but it should be consenting adults' decision, not mandated just because they're afraid of the liability. Another downside for Airbnb is obviously with hotels and all these other crazy things where people are trying to put restrictions on, so you got to watch out for that. You got to pay attention to your local legislation, or just be in the know with other local Airbnbers. And then the biggest thing with Airbnb, and this is the one thing I always caution everybody not to do, or to do, depending on how you look at it, don't buy a property just for Airbnb. Always, and I mean always, there is no exception to this, always. Make sure that that property would make sense as an investment, as a long-term investment, as a long-term rental. So if you buy a property and you rent it out long-term, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 6 months even, whatever, as a long-term rental, if it can't cash flow and it doesn't make sense as a rental property, don't do it. Don't buy it, because no matter how safe you feel like your market is, look at what happened with the flu this year. Shut down. And even if they didn't shut it down, tourism just... You don't want that to happen. I know people who lost a ton of money. A metric load of money, because they did not understand what you could and couldn't do if Airbnb wasn't rented. And so they didn't have the ability to do long-term rentals because it didn't work for them. They were still going to lose money. So now they're forced between the decision of, do I lose money and hope that they open up and tourism starts again? Or do I lose less money, but guarantee that I'm going to keep losing money for the duration of this lease until this open? Like, not a good spot. So you've got to make sure that it makes sense as a long-term rental. Even if you won't make as much money, you've got to make sure that you can afford all of the expenses and hopefully cash flow as a long-term rental. So if something happens or anything happens, you're covered, your basis is covered, and you'll be okay. Now that's my final piece of advice. That's the biggest one. Always make sure the investment makes sense with long-term rentals, because Airbnb, although it is a seemingly great opportunity, it's still new to the world of real estate investing. And nobody knows what it's going to look like in 10 years. It hasn't been around long enough. No one knows what it's going to look like in 20 years. It's still new, right? So it can change. It's morphing. It's ever moving. Markets are changing. Rules are changing. You just don't know. And the more people who get into Airbnb, the more it'll probably bring prices down, because as with anything, more competition, more supply equals less demand equals lower prices, right? People are going to want to compete. So what you might have been renting for $300 will go down to $250 a night, and then $200 a night. Who knows? So just make sure it will work long term so that you're covered no matter what, because real estate should always be the long-term game. And one other note on all of this, the rental arbitrage game, where you rent somebody's place and then you rent it out on Airbnb, make sure you have skin in the game. Don't be that person who rents someone's house and rents it on Airbnb, and then when the world gets shut down, you can't make the rental payment, so you just leave the actual owner high and dry. That's going to cause all kinds of additional just goofs in the Airbnb world. There's going to be extra policies. It's going to make it worse for everyone, and it's just not being a good person. So if you're going to do the rental arbitrage game, that's fine, but make sure that you can keep making the rental payment and you understand that you're on the hook for that lease, even if Airbnb shuts down. Even if you have to sublet to someone else or move into the place, just be a good person. And as a final note, I'm going to reiterate once again, I will have a link down below for getting into Airbnb hosting, or just for taking your first trip. If you haven't taken a trip on Airbnb, I absolutely recommend it. Please, for the love of all that is holy, go do like a one-night stay in a cabin if you want. Like, do something. Just get out there and see the world, disconnect, go check it out. I love staying in Airbnbs. I highly recommend you do it on your next trip or something. If you use either of the codes down below for hosting or trips, you're gonna get some bonuses, you're gonna get some extra cash, you're gonna get a discount on your next stay. I'm gonna get the same. It's a win-win situation, and if you're gonna do it anyway, you might as well use the code because it hooks us both up instead of screwing us both over. So have a great day. Smash the like button, subscribe, whatever I'm doing with my hands. I love you all.